I've been trying to be smarter lately. Um, it's uh, it's actually going fine. I'm not getting smarter, but it is. I'm having a nice time. So I spend all my time just listening to like other comedy podcasts. I just listen to other people who are funnier than me, and then I come on here or other podcasts, and I pretty much just try and copy them for an hour. And that's why it turns out pretty boring. And today's probably going to be pretty boring too, but maybe we're getting somewhere. I don't know. I've been listening to this guy, Slavoj Žižek, which some of my cool listeners might have heard of. He's a very trendy, modern day Marxist philosopher. People got mad at him because he's from I think Yugoslavia, but people got mad at him because he said that Trump would be a good idea because he was like, "Oh, Trump is going to make the Americans realize how fucked they are, and then they're going to rise up and have some sort of a workers' revolution." And that didn't happen. So I think he now doesn't stand by that opinion, which is, listen, it's a lot of people said that might happen. A lot of people, because I think people believed that Trump would actually embolden Americans to do something, and it didn't. It made us organize a few times, which I think is pretty funny. That it's like protests, I feel like, did those even exist before revolutions? I feel like people used to just revolt. I feel like if a bunch of fucking people got together all in a group standing outside of City Hall, they went in. They went inside. But nowadays, we don't go inside. We just get megaphones and then we stand outside and we're like, fuck you. And it is fun. I will say that it is fun. I remember it's not supposed to be fun though, is the problem. I think that's the problem with a lot of American protests is they're like kind of a good time for everybody. I feel like not just white people, like it just makes you feel good to be around all those people, which is fine, but we're pretty obsessed with just being in a group. We're like, and maybe during the pandemic there were a lot of protests. That's why it was exciting too, because you're just in your home and then you're like, "Oh, I can get out and I can go march in the streets with hundreds of people, but nobody is going to be mad at me." And that was pretty exciting. One protest I went to was about I think just it was generally against cops. It was outside of the county attorney's office. I think it was, what's her name, Jackie Lacey or something. She sucks. And mothers of victims of police brutality went up on the stage, which was outside of her office, and talked about losing their children to police brutality. And it was very powerful, mostly somber speeches, a lot of crying. But there was one woman that went up and called Jackie a stupid, raggedy ass bitch for about 5 minutes. And I'm not summarizing her speech. I'm saying that is pretty much what she said for 5 minutes. She was like, "My son's dead. This fucking bitch is in there making a shit ton of money. Fuck this bitch. Fuck her. I hate her." It was cool. It was very cool because it was a nice situation where somebody is saying some wild, although not untrue, still wild shit, and nobody can really tell them to stop. Because if I got up there and did that, they'd be like, "Okay, we agree, but you're just a dude," let alone a young white dude who's not really the one who's supposed to be speaking here. But she got up there and was just talking mad shit. Just fucking mad shit for like 5 minutes, just calling her a bitch. And I was like sitting there, I was thinking, I was like, I wonder Because the point is for Jackie in her office, in her ivory tower, to hear all of this. So I was wondering, I was like, I wonder what speech got her the most. I wonder if the ones that were crying really got her, because that's not against, like, it is against her, but the words themselves are more just like, this is what you're a part of. So you want to believe that maybe that is what would get them. But also you realize that these people are kind of heartless, and that's what puts them in these positions. So I was like, honestly, I bet that mom calling Jackie a raggedy ass bitch was probably the most impactful of that day. Because Jackie's probably just sitting in her office just being like, fucking, you're a bitch. What do you mean? I'm not a bitch. Doing my job. Why am I a bitch? What the hell did I do? I didn't do shit. Fucking bitch. Which I feel like is what those people respond to. You know what I mean? As politicians. They're very petty people, I think, all of them. And I think they're trained to not respond to emotion. They're trained to see a person cry and then tell them to vote blue no matter who or whatever, you know. But they don't have a lot of good experience with being called loser ass bitches, which is why Trump won. They don't know what to do. They're like, okay, well, I don't know about that. And then it's like, no, you are a bitch. And then they just don't know what to say, which is funny. And I do like watching, you know. But so yeah, that guy Slavois, he liked Trump because he thought shit was going to happen, and then it just didn't. We just started a bunch of hashtags, and we didn't do shit. So some people kind of hate him and think he's an asshole, and I don't know all of his beliefs. You know, he's a real separate himself from mainstream beliefs kind of philosopher, which, you know, usually means that, like, people will, you know, talk about gender identity, and he's like, I don't know, you know. To be honest, he seems to be completely in support of, like, LGBTQ rights and things like that, but at the same time, he is a Yugoslavian or Slovenian intellectual, so it's like, he is in support, and then he just talks for 5 minutes, and you're like, I honestly have no idea what you think about this, but I know you're not being phobic of all this, so I'll say that's fine. But I've been listening to lectures from him. Just been listening to lectures on shame. He was talking about shame and relating it to governments. He had a lecture called the main purpose of ideology in the modern age is to rid people of hope. Could I tell you what either of those talks were really about? No, not at all. But I'll tell you one thing. It feels better as you're in the car or you're cooking or whatever, that what you're listening to is a guy that's written 50 books, as opposed to a guy who is just a funnier version of me. Like, I shouldn't listen to them. You shouldn't listen to people who you kind of just want to be. In some in such a specific sense. Like, I shouldn't spend my time just listening to other comedians talk, because then you just end up being the dumbest person in the world. And you just start believing things that they said, and then people are like, oh, you must like him, and then you're just a guy that likes him, you know, which usually him for a guy like me. It's just a bunch of other dumb white dudes that I'll listen to. And they're great, but if you listen to them all the goddamn time, you really don't have much to say, which is, I don't know. I want to start just knowing about things that I guess at least most people don't. Not to be smarter, but just because I can't stand another day of all of my talking points being like, yeah, I heard Shane Gillis or Tom Segura on a podcast talking about this. And it's like, they're both hilarious, but that can't be how the fuck I talk to people. It's so goddamn embarrassing to be the I heard it on a podcast guy, and that is most of me. Because the thing is, it's like, listen, I fucking have no life experience. I'm 23. So I don't have a lot of shit to talk about. I have a few fun stories, and that's pretty much it. And when you do comedy since you're 17 too, you're not spending a lot of your time like partying. Like you have weird situations, but for the most part, you're just sitting in rooms with other people who have spent too much of their time doing the same thing. So the problem is if I'm in conversation and somebody says something that reminds me of a podcast, I will then just start telling them about a part in a podcast, which is not fucking conversation. You know what I mean? That's not something interesting to listen to. This is barely interesting to listen to. I'm talking about how I have nothing to talk about, you know? And, you know, maybe you're sitting listening being like, hey, Cooper, maybe you should live a more interesting life. And if you say that, I disagree.